Welcome to the channel, My Kids You're Teaching. We created this channel and this website in order to support parents, inform parents about what's going on in our schools and with our children in general. It helped this channel greatly if you would go down and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when there's new videos. It is our intention to put these things out to inform parents of news stories and things that are happening in your school system with your specific school or your school boards all across the United States. And we're even going to bring you some stories that are from around the world so that you can see exactly how far this reaches. We compiled this information about the sexualization of our children, and there's an unexpected history here that we really want to go into. One of the first things we want to say is teachers as a whole are dedicated and hardworking professionals. Not all teachers are subjecting our students to this type of sexualization and indoctrination. The history of where this behavior comes from is going to shock you. And allies came together from all communities to stop this in the past. So what has happened that has allowed this as acceptable today? So let's say where it began. Let's go all the way back to the 1900s. There was a man named Harold Harry Hay, born in 1912 in the UK. He was raised by his parents in Chile and California. As he grew up, he became an actor. He got involved in the Communist Party and labor activism. He eventually, in 1938, tried to assimilate and marry a woman to join the heterosexual groups, society, and adopted 2 children. After realizing that he was gay and that this was a mistake, he ended the marriage and became very much involved in gay advocacy. So in the 1950s, some 10, 15 years later, Harry Hay became an early gay advocate. He founded the Mattachine Society in 1950 that was a political organization to help get certain candidates elected. Originally called the Bachelor Society, it became the Mattachine Society. Most of the members of the Mattachine Society were communists, and they eventually had problems belonging to the communist groups and being openly homosexual. So the communist groups declared them as security risks and kicked them out, because during this time in the 50s, they were hunting communists everywhere. People were being blacklisted in Hollywood and their jobs and things like that. So the Mattachine Society became an early gay rights group. And although Harry Hay worked for years for gay rights, he eventually resigned after 3 years of working in the Mattachine Society that he created. So why was learning about Harry Hay important? I mean, why go all the way back to 1900? Gay rights groups were active in politics and in human rights. These groups were founded with the purpose of supporting the rights of the minority in political parties and in society. These groups were instrumental in supporting gay and lesbian causes and advocating for their rights. But it didn't stop there. It doesn't end there. So let's talk about David Thorstad. Who is David Thorstad? Well, he was born in 1941 in Minnesota. He was very much active in Trotskyist politics, which is basically Marxism, born out of the Russian territories. Not much is written about his early years. Even when you go looking it up on the internet and in different publications about his life, there's not really much said. But he did move to New York in 1970s, early 1970s. So while in New York, he was very active in the Socialist Workers' Party, which is socialism. He was a writer for their newsletter, and he became very involved in the gay liberation movement. Now, he left the SWP because of their refusal to support his support of the gay liberation movement. He became the president of the Gay Activist Alliance, the GAA. Now, the GAA is a group that was created after the Stonewall riots, in which the police raided a known mafia bar. It was called the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village and in New York. And it was targeting not just the mafia, but also the gay and lesbian bar that was there. It was a known gay and lesbian bar, specifically by the police. Well, this sparked riots because they were targeted, and they just wanted to have the right to go out in public, live their life, and to live openly as gays and lesbians in this community. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. And they were targeted. You got to think, this was in the 50s, and it was a different time than it is now, thank goodness. And they started to advocate for members of the gay and lesbian community to live openly after there were days of riots. Because they just wanted to live without persecution. And that is what David Thorstad was really instrumental in. He was starting these organizations for LGBT rights. Now, let's get back to Harry Hay, because this is where things kind of cross paths. Gay activism was growing in the 1970s because there was the war activism out of the 1960s countercultures. And you had a lot of people in college campuses and things like that because, out of the 50s where you had the communists were on college campuses, you had this merging of socialism and communism and the like. So, of course, out of these countercultures, out of the late 60s, the 70s is when activism changed from anti-war to pro-rights. Now, pushing for the rights of gay and lesbian communities was what Harry Hay was doing. His activism led to many advances in communities and support structures for gay and lesbian community members. He helped to create the Los Angeles LGBT Center. It's the largest one in the world, even today. And of course, more groups were created around the country. Now, he created this group called the Radical Fairies in 1978, 1979. Now, the word fairy is kind of a different spelling, and it was a play on a derogatory term that heterosexual society called a gay man. So they reclaimed that word and called themselves the Radical Fairies, which we'll call RF. The RF were more spiritual and had influence of paganism, environmentalism, anarchism, because it truly embodied that 1960s counterculture that we were talking about. Because that's where Harry Hay came from. He started the Mattachine Society in the 50s and came up through the 60s in activism with communism and socialism. And that's where he crossed paths with David Thorstad. So since Harry Hay was deeply interested in Native American religions, and South American religions as well, they were incorporated into the RF belief system. The RF held its first spiritual conference in 1979 in Arizona. Now, the Radical Fairies, as it's defined, is a mixture of political alternative, counterculture, spirituality movement. The fairies contain elements of Marxism, feminism, paganism, Native American and New Age spirituality, anarchism, the myopic men's movement, radical individualism, the therapeutic culture of self-fulfillment, and self-actualization, earth-based movements in support of sustainable communities, spiritual solemnity coupled with a camp sensibly gay liberation and drag. Now, you could pack any ism you want in there because that covers quite a lot. But it was more of a spiritual kind of free-thinking new age organization. Now, they created what they call fairy sanctuaries. Now, these were basically rural areas that these fairies, as they called themselves, could live in safety and as a community, in a commune. Now, the communes were come out of the 60s when you had these people were wanting to, tune in and drop out, go into a commune kind of thing. And this is where you had that 60s counterculture being bred into even a decade later in the 70s. Well, the radical fairies have spread around the world. It was becoming supportive of drag marches, political activism, supporting the rights of LGBT persons, and to identify as they would like to and live in a sanctuary. This is one of the first times that spirituality was actually used to identify sexual spiritualism and gender spiritualism as part of an identified religious ideology, somewhat. So let's get back to David Thorstad, because we said that they crossed paths. Thorstad was the president of the Gay Activist Alliance, the GAA, in the 1970s. He published a paper along with his collaborator, John Lauriston, that attempted to prove that the gay liberation movement had a long history and support, especially in Germany from the 30s to the 50s. So he literally tried to convince everybody that Nazi Germany was really accepting of gay men. In 1977, Thorstad founded the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights that lasted until 1994. His activism was aimed at giving LGBT persons the same rights to live as other Americans during a time when police raids and discrimination were quite common against gays and lesbians, sometimes foreigners, as well as African Americans. Like I said before, different time than now, thank goodness. But something else was brewing that many people were unaware of right under the surface. Now, David Thorstad created a group in 1977 to 1978 called NAMBLA. NAMBLA stands for the North American Man-Boy Love Association. Wow. Thorstad served on the steering committee from 1977 until 1996. He was on the steering committee and helped guide that group. So what is the goal of NAMBLA? It pushes for the legalization of pederasty and pedophilia. Thorstad advocated for this for the rest of his life until he died in the 2000s. Pederasty is the sexual activity between an adult man and a young boy under the age of consent, which was technically understood as being 18. Here in the United States, you can't buy tobacco or do certain things until you are 18, can't vote, that kind of thing. So that's considered the age of ascension into adulthood. But the age of consent was generally at the same time. Pedophilia is having sexual feelings directed toward youths or children. Now, both are distasteful and criminal in civilized societies. I mean, when we look at, 6 and 7-year-old girls being married off in some cultures to 45-year-old men, that upsets us. Now, we're not talking about an older teen having sex with a younger teen. We're not here to advocate for or demonize anybody or anything that goes on. We're not anything. We are talking about grown adults having sex with young boys or grown women having sex with young girls under the age of consent. Now, we know teens are having sex. We're not stupid. But we're not here to discuss that situation. But they are. Thorstad claimed and believed that pederasty is the way homosexuality is expressed in modern culture. So he believed that homosexuality was truly expressed through having sex with younger children.